6 of the Rob Ellis Show on the A2D radio network. And I'll tell you what, I get excited for all of our guests, but I am particularly excited for who we're going to be speaking with today because he's a guy who I have a lot of admiration for, who lived out his childhood dream and walked off on his own terms, but is still crushing it and doing so many different things that we're going to get into. Let's welcome in our guest for today, the one and only. We're locking all the doors and windows, and it's Marc Zumoff. Yes, Zoo, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, bro. And we're live, right? Like
We
we're
are,
live,
yes, sir.
live.
Yes.
See, I love that. So much of our world is taped and staged and rehearsed, and I love live. That's why I love what I did for so many years. I enjoy that aspect of walking the tightrope without a net.
You're right. There is a different edge to it, right? I mean, psychologically, if you're taping something, you're like, can always mess up and go back and it's going to be fine. The fun part is all the little hiccups when you're going live.
And I think it makes you better because you have to ratchet up your concentration that much more. Because for exactly the reason that you said, that if you make a mistake, what's the big deal? But and listen, I said a lot of stupid things in my career because we were live and I couldn't take it back. But what are you going to do?
I hear you. Well, you did all right, my friend. You did.
Yeah,
all
I
right.
guess I did.
Let's what we like to do. I love walking through the journey, Marc, and what gets people there because I think it helps people. You know, we're all going through our own struggles in our own ways. And sometimes you can't see the forest through the trees and you're saying to yourself, man, I'm just spinning my wheels here and it doesn't necessarily work. Well, but because I think the natural assumption is when somebody gets to a certain juncture in their career, like when you were doing Sixers games, everybody thinks you just woke up one day and that was handed to you and you're doing Sixers games. It doesn't work that way. You got to put the work in. Sometimes there's good fortune, you know, all those kind of things have to happen. I always say I'd much rather be lucky than good. And there's a lot of things that have to happen along the way. So I love yours is a very unique Philadelphia story too, which always appeals to me. So let's start with that. You're born in Mayfair. You grow up in the Somerton section of Northeast Philly, and you're a sports fan. Now I've seen varying accounts. You tell me which one is real. I saw either 63 or 64. You and your dad go to a Sixers game. Right. And this was back in the day. This is pre-Spectrum, kids, and pre-Wells Fargo Center. You go to a Sixers game back in the day, and it really kind of changed things for you. It was your sort of awakening, right?
It was. So it was actually the first year the team moved from Syracuse. You're right on. It was 63. It was right around my birthday. It was late in 63. And my father said, we're going to the 76ers game tonight. They're a new team in town. We showed up at Civic Center Convention Hall, which doesn't even exist anymore. I think the Penn Abramson Cancer Center is on that spot right now on Civic Center Boulevard. But so we showed up there, which was the primary home court. And the guy said at the ticket window, we don't have a game here tonight. We have the boat show. So my father said, well, I see that they're, in the newspaper, they're playing. He said, yeah, they're playing the game at the old Philadelphia Arena, which burned down. That's in, that's gone to the history books as well.
Right.
And it was this old sort of 7,000 seat arena. They had a minor league hockey team there. And so we ended up being late for the game. But I just remember as a kid going into the arena, going through the turnstile. And right before I actually got to eyeball the court, I heard the crowd cheering and it startled me. But at the same time, it kind of excited me. And then I walked in and I saw the beauty of the hardwood, the ball hitting the hardwood. The players in their satin shorts, and you could actually hear the players yelling at one another. And there was a haze over the court because
Smoking
then you get
cigars.
like smoke in the arena, that kind of thing. But the whole experience when it was over, I fell in love with the game. It was also beautiful to me, and I always thought that from that moment on, I would like to be involved in some form or fashion. And as life evolved, I discovered that I didn't have the athletic ability and I was going to have to do it some other way.
Well, and that's the thing too. I don't know that people understand the NBA of then, even when you first started your career in broadcasting, it's not the NBA of now. I mean, you're talking like it was an afterthought in a lot of ways. I mean, at that time, you're talking about, baseball, boxing, maybe horse racing, college football. The NBA was way down on the pecking order, even during the great Wilt, Russell days.
You're right, Rob. You have to remember that when the Basketball Association of America formed in 46, there were a number of National Hockey League owners who were looking to fill other dates with something. Professional basketball was a lot like professional golf. I mean, the amateur game in golf was a lot larger than the professional game until the likes of, Palmer and Nicklaus came along. But as it relates to the NBA, you're right. 50s, 60s, 70s, crowds were slim, and my goodness. I mean, just to think of the world stage it plays on now and how big the stars are. LeBron James, he's mega. He's not just a basketball player. He's a corporation.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It was, and there might have been like 4,000 or 5,000 fans there, which was kind of typical for an NBA game back then.
But it was intimate. It was different. It can reach you in a different way. That's for sure. So growing up, it's sort of in the back of your mind. Okay, this might be something that I'm interested in. Go to George Washington High School. Were you doing any kind of play-by-play? Was that even an option at GW? Like how did it manifest itself? Did it not happen until Temple where you really started getting into this?
A lot of it was just my own creativity. Now there are a lot of high schools that have broadcast setups, digital setups, which is really phenomenal, but they didn't have anything close to that at George Washington. I think they had some kind of a video department, but it had nothing to do with sports or sportscasting. So typically what I did was I would turn the sound down of the TV and do games into a tape recorder. A lot of times, my parents couldn't afford to send me to day camp. So when my parents went off on like the hot July and August days, I would pitch the ball to the garage and aggravate my mother. But at the same time, I'd be like announcing the fact that I was pitching and how I was doing. I would make up games. And the story that I tell was that I would put the TV on channel 8 because it was static. Okay. And static to me in my warped mind sounded like a crowd. So I would literally sit by the TV and I would regulate the crowd and I would make up a game. Here's Greer to Chamberlain, back to Greer, now to Cunningham, right baseline shot, good. And I would turn up the static and it would sound just like a crowd. So,
wow.
A lot of times when I talk about NBA players, yes, they had college and coaching and AAU and all kinds of formal camps and instruction or whatever. But a lot of what they did or do now instinctively, I think, is born on the playgrounds and parks and other areas. And it was the same thing with me. A lot of times I would even listen back to me doing a Sixers game and I heard the 14-year-old kid coming out.
How much did the 66-67 team influence you in terms of your love for this team? Will Chamberlain, of course, they won the championship. Billy Cunningham was the sixth man on that team. You mentioned Halger, some of the other greats that were on that team. How big a role did they play in your Sixers love?
It was immense. And a lot of that was just gleaned by radio. Remember back in the day, and you alluded to it earlier, how, I don't want to say prehistoric the NBA was, but certainly its developmental years. Now, every single solitary everything is on TV and social media. But back then, what did they have? 10, 12, 15 games on television. Other than that, it was all radio. So Andy Musser, Bill Campbell, people like that, I would be riveted to. And I just remember the Celtics had a dynasty. They had won 8 straight titles. And in 67, the Sixers were 68-13. They had the league's best record. And I remember, I want to say it was game 5 at Convention Hall, where the Sixers had an opportunity to wrap it up, and they did. And I just remember hearing the crowd and just imagining what the celebration must have been like. And there are films out there to show you, but dethroning the Celtics was a huge thing back then. I mean, think about it, 8 straight titles.
Oh, yeah.
And then they played Rick Barry and the San Francisco Warriors and went on to win the whole thing. And I don't remember any kind of a parade or celebration. There's footage I see now and then of the Sixers getting off a charter. And there's, I don't know, a few hundred people waiting for them at the airport, and that's it.
Yeah, a little different than what it looked like for the Nuggets.
Just a little different.
That's for sure. All right, so decide to enroll at Temple. Was that with the intent to expand the broadcasting career? Was that one of the reasons why you chose Temple? Was that your major? Walk me through the Temple experience for you, because I know you're playing a prominent role there now as well, present day.
I think you're giving me way too much credit in terms of actually planning my career. It was simply a case of, I think Temple just chose me. It was reputed to, and it certainly did have a great broadcasting program. And it was an extension of high school. Again, my parents were of modest means. So I literally commuted every day. I continued to live at home. And, as I went through Temple, I'll be quite honest with you, Rob, my mother saw my dad have a lot of different jobs when we were growing up. So because of that insecurity, she did, when I talked about broadcasting or sportscasting or calling games, she didn't want to hear any of that. It was all about, doing something else, be a pharmacist or something, which is
Accountant.
totally,
Yeah.
thank you, which is totally out of my realm. And I actually worked my way through college at a scrap iron and steel yard, which had a business and a sales component. And I thought that was going to be my future. But after I left Temple in 1977, I found after working there for a couple of months that the desire to be on the air was too great. So I sent out tapes and I got my first job, which was at a radio station in Trenton. They were off the air 3, 4, 5 times a week. I did the morning news. I actually worked from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. with 3 hours off in the middle of the shift. It was weird. And they were 6 weeks behind in my pay. But when I got that first check, it was $110 a week. So it was $90 and some cents. I just kept staring at it, saying to myself, wow, I actually just talked on the radio and got paid for it. This is the coolest thing ever. Yeah. And that was it. I was hooked from that point forward.
All right. So let's leap to 83. Because that's a big moment in your career. It's really sort of a jumping off point for people who are too young to remember Prism. It was a really interesting hodgepodge and mix of movies, of entertainment, of sports as well. And it was very unique to itself. This is pre, regional sports networks and all this kind of stuff. You didn't have that world that we have now, right? And even ESPN was in its real infancy during that time. So Prism was unique, especially for sports loving kids like me. Anything I could get, man, I couldn't. It was awesome, but it was also weird. You'd have Smokey and the Bandit on, and then there was a Sixers game. It was a really kind of unique mix. So talk to me about the process of getting the job at Prism and just what that sort of opened up for you.
Just real quick on Prism, for you really young people who park on the Broad Street side of Wells Fargo Center, there's that statue of Ed Snyder.
Right.
Ed Snyder was one of the greatest sports executives really in the history of professional sports. Mm-hmm. And there was a point where the Flyers were selling out. This was like the early 70s. And, they can't play at the Vet. So what he did was he created Prism, and Prism allowed him to televise home games. And in addition to that, it was a real hybrid. So you're right. It was Flyers, Sixers, Phillies, Big Five college basketball. Mm-hmm. And it was movies that you would get on HBO. So it was this great sort of hybrid. And one of the first sportscasting jobs I had was indoor soccer, a team called the Fever. And they went belly up in 1982, but I ended up doing a few games for Prism as the Fever announcer. And the Prism folks caught wind of me and they liked me. So they hired me, believe it or not, to do movie announcements. And then there was an opportunity for me to become the halftime host of the Sixers. So that's how I was introduced to Sixer World. And my first actual year of working at Prism was the championship year, 82-83, which was just an amazing experience. So here I am, a rookie in TV sportscasting at Prism, thinking, wow, this is great. Is this going to happen every year?
Yeah, right. I know. We all got spoiled at that time. Sports were good back then, Mark, for all the teams. That's for sure. But So you got your foot in the door. I mean, that's really all you needed. Just give me a little crack and I'm going to get in there. And, you mentioned you're doing halftime, you're doing pre and post. I know you're doing other sports as well. Was the goal always Sixers, or if it would have went in the direction of Phillies or Flyers, would that have been fine too? How did you view, that opportunity?
It was amazing. They hired me, and I had to do features, but I didn't know how to edit. I got an intern to teach me how to edit. I learned how to shoot. I did my own halftime features, and as I began, and this was actually a great internship for me, for lack of a better description. Yes, I was a full-time employee, and I was getting paid, and I was on the air in a major market, but I didn't know anything about TV sportscasting, and so. And it was great, Rob, from the standpoint that it taught me the NBA. I met all the players, the coaches. I got to learn strategy. I got to understand history because I was doing so much research and talking to so many people. and I just love the NBA, and that was my desire to one day be the voice of the Sixers. But there was a time where the late great Gene Hart had a heart attack. The longtime voice of the Flyers, I filled in for him. I filled in, did some college basketball, some other things. I did wings lacrosse on the radio a couple of times. I ended up doing a number of different things. And while I was doing the Flyers, it was really cool. It was about a 2 or 3 week period, and I knew that Gene was going to come back and everything was going to be fine, and it was his gig. But man, I was saying to myself, if this ever becomes a full-time gig, I'm good with that too. I never did Phillies, but I got to do the Flyers, and I would have been happy going in that direction had it come to pass.
No, I hear you, but you do get your opportunity, and it's the Sixers, and obviously it's a team that you had a great, deal of affection for, as a kid growing up. When you finally get that opportunity, Mark, I mean, I know you were doing games here and there, and sometimes be fill in and whatnot, but when you finally got that shot in '94, I think was the first full season for you. Do you take a minute and just sort of pinch yourself when that happens?
It was surreal. But I was also in a 1-year contract, and I think that I got the job. I mean, Harold Katz had approval rights, and he wanted somebody with experience. I did actually, little known fact, there was another cable channel called Sports Channel Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And before '94, I actually did 13 games in each of the previous 2 seasons, and it gave him an opportunity to hear me. So in '94, when the Sixers said, all right, or Prism said, we want Marc Zumoff, Harold Katz said, okay, but he only gets a 1-year deal. They didn't want to expose themselves to anything more than that. So there was pressure on me to make sure that, everybody liked me. And I mean, it became my whole life. It was even on off days, I was thinking about the next game and what can I do and how can I get better, and listening to myself and getting critiques and all of that. So, I liken it to that the kid on draft night who gets drafted and he's standing up there with Adam Silver and he said to himself, I made it. And I'm saying, it's only just begun for you. You got to face LeBron tomorrow and KD the next night and Joel Embiid the night after. So it was a trial by fire for me, but fortunately I got past it.
How hard is that balance? Especially when you're new into a job and or just starting out, because you want to put everything that you have into it, and you did, and you're giving it your all. Like you said, you're thinking about it on your off days, but you also need to sort of balance that with family life. You have a wife and 2, great kids. I mean, how hard is that early in your career to have that balance?
It was made a lot easier, Rob, by the fact that my wife was, she was amazing. She had her own high-profile job, and she held down the fort at home. She did raise 2 beautiful boys and made it possible for me to be sportscaster boy and travel the country for 27 years. And if we could just fast forward for a second, that was actually a chance for me to begin to pay her back. One of the reasons why I stepped aside. And we could talk about that further if you want. But it was indeed a balancing act. And listen, it's a high profile, high intensity, hour consuming or time consuming job. And so, you get home and your wife says, here, take your son, or here, do this and do that and do the other thing. And so, for a while to try to find that balance was not easy, but I never complained because for a kid to grow up in Northeast Philly who idolized the Sixers and end up doing their games on TV, I was never, ever, ever going to complain about that gig. That's for sure.
Yeah. And let's face it, your early years, they were not great teams. Let's be kind about this. This was the, Clarence Weatherspoon, who was a tough guy, but he was surrounded by not great teams.
Right.
How big is that challenge when you're saying like game 78 and the team's going nowhere? How hard is it until the AI era hits? Were those years challenging to kind of keep it entertaining and keep the people, wanting to come back and watch more?
So necessity is the mother of invention. And what I ended up doing was figuring out a way to not just, put lipstick on a pig and gloss over stuff, because people could obviously see that the team was not a good team. So the word struggle I use that one a lot. He's struggling, or the
Yeah.
Sixers are struggling, or that sort of thing, just as a more benign way of kind of criticizing the team.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you had great players coming in. So that would
Mhm.
give me an opportunity to say, hey, Michael Jordan's in the building tonight, or,
Right.
whoever had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar,
Mhm.
Magic Johnson, whoever it happened to be. And so that gave me an opportunity to, figure out a way to make a broadcast entertaining and informative while not totally killing the team, because after all, Prism or NBC Sports
Yeah.
Philadelphia or Comcast Sportsnet, they're partners with the team. But when they deserve criticism,
Mhm.
we would get it. They would get it, but it was done, I think, in a way that was constructive, and nobody had to take any bullets personally.
All right, so if we'll take a quickie here, we're going to come back, Mark. We're going to get into some really fun years here, Iverson, and then of course, as things go, your decision to step away, what you're doing now. We'll get into all those kind of things. It's been a blast so far. We're going to keep it rolling with Marc Zumoff on the Rob Ellis Show, A2D Radio Network. Be right back.
Hey, Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Philly Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site phillysportstrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
All right, we are back. Rob Ellis Show with our guest this week, Marc Zumoff. The man was 27 years the television voice of the Philadelphia 76ers. All right, Mark, so there were little lean years here and there. But then 1996, a lot of things start to change. You have Pat Croce taking over. You have Larry Brown coming in. And then, of course, they draft Allen Iverson. And it's like a rocket ship. It's an adventure every day, but it's a rocket ship. Did you have any idea what you were about to embark upon in the early stages of that? Did you feel like things were going in the right direction? Did you have any idea how it would go?
Actually, no. And furthermore, to borrow a famous Allen Iverson phrase, that first year, his rookie year, was not peaches and cream.
Yes.
I mean, that was not a good team. And that was Johnny Davis, who was the head coach, and
Right.
Brad Greenberg, the general manager. I think he was the only GM in NBA history to be relieved of his duties after a season, having never made a trade. He put the team together, and I think there was a lot of dreaming about this dream backcourt with Allen Iverson and Jerry Stackhouse, but quite frankly, that never worked for a lot of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very difficult first season.
Right.
When Larry Brown came along the following year, when Pat Croce said, all right, you know what? I made a mistake here.
Mm-hmm.
I got to bring in a guy with experience. That's when you started to think things could change. And Larry Brown, I mean, he put a sharp knife to that club and started making some changes.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry Stackhouse was traded to Detroit. Aaron McKee and Theo Ratliff came in. And when you sat back and said, whoa, this guy means business. And then you would watch his practices and how meticulous he was. And, of course, his track record, everywhere he went, he was a winner. That's when you started to think, hey, you know what? Something here is bubbling, and it smells pretty good.
Yes, it did. And by the way, you and I were talking about this pre-show, but the Everything But the Chip on the NBA Network, I thought was very well done. And you were in it quite a bit, pretty prominently displayed in it. And I thought they did a good job of sort of walking through the build up into that season, right? 2001 obviously was the crescendo there, Mark. But there were some tough times along the way. You felt like maybe they're not going to be able to get over the hump here with the Pacers and some of the other teams. But how invigorating was it calling those games during those times?
I will always say, and people ask me all the time, what was your favorite call or your favorite game in your career? And it happened that first year they made the playoffs. They ended an 8-season drought, and it was the lockout year. We weren't even sure we were going to play. It was a 50-game season, Rob. Right. So it's a sprint.
Yeah.
And it was almost like a college season. Today the NBA is a slog, and there are some nights where the players aren't into it, broadcasters aren't into it, the fans are listless. It's like a lot of games. 50-game season, every game mattered. The Sixers ended up playing above 500 for the first time in eons, and they made the playoffs as a 6 seed. They played Orlando. They were a 3 seed, and the Sixers managed to somehow split in Orlando. This is a best of 5, so you come home, you could win the series, which they did. But that game 3 was the first ever playoff game at what was then, I think, First Union Center or Core State Center. And I will swear to this day, it felt like nobody ever sat down, that the crowd was standing up the entire game. And Iverson had an NBA record. I think it still stands. He had 10 steals in the game. I mean, he was all over the place. There was a near fight in front of the Orlando bench. The late Chuck Daly and Matt Geiger almost got into it. It was bizarre. But that to me said, hey, this is a team that's got some fight. They defend, and then you could be a lot more physical. The rules have changed considerably since, but I think that one game was like a turning point in many ways for that club.
And what a unique, I can't remember. Really, it's almost like 4-pronged. Croce, Billy King, Larry Brown, and Allen. It was such a unique dynamic. What good cop, bad cop, traffic cop, you're just trying to calm everybody, negotiator. Like there were so many dynamics going on behind the scenes, Mark. And now you were privy to it, but there's only so much you can reveal on the air. It was a really unique. We've never seen anything like that now publicly, like some of the stuff that was going on.
And it has been aired out in some ways. That's one thing that time will do. It allows you to revisit that stuff maybe in a more frank fashion. And I think, the story of Pat now bringing Larry and Allen into a room and challenging them to come out and come out of that room knowing that, listen, you may do it different ways, but we all have the same goal here. And you got to figure out a way to get along because I'm not firing the coach and I'm not trading the player. And so we want, and that still didn't end it. There were still issues they had down the road, but that's the beauty of sports. It's somebody once said it's life with the volume turned up, and so you may have to work with somebody in your office or have somebody on your Sunday softball team that isn't quite to your liking, but you have to figure out a way as a team to get it done. And that's what they ended up doing. And that's why 2001 was magical for those reasons, among others.
You think about even the playoff run, how tight it was with Toronto. Vince Carter goes to graduation that day, misses the shot in the corner. That Buck series, you forget, big dogs tip. There's just so many things that it very easily could have gone the other way. We don't even think about that team in these ways that we do now.
Right. And that went 7 games as well. And Iverson, I think, had to sit out one of those games because he was injured. And so, again, you're going 7 games, but, the 2 previous years when they got eliminated by Indiana in the second round, made it all that much more dramatic. You got to get by Indiana. Oh, they finally did that. You're going 7 games with Toronto. You're going 7 games with Milwaukee. It literally was it was a Rocky story. Let's face it, even with the end where, they didn't win the finals and you say to yourself, that's all right. They're going to come back and somehow they're going to have to figure out a way, which unfortunately they did not. But my goodness, Rob, the ride. And listen, you like me, we're Philly guys. I'm a lot older than you, but I have never, ever, ever in my lifetime seen a city get behind a team like they did that 2001 team. And that includes the Eagles when they won the Super Bowl. And people might say that I'm crazy, but with those flags that everyone was flying.
So galvanizing, Mark.
Exactly.
Everybody. And that's the thing I love most about sports is it transcends everything. It's not about race. It's not about religion, ethnicity. Everybody's got a common goal. And that's what makes it so much fun because you saw, people are hugging each other in the stands in the streets. You're right. Everybody had their flags coming out of their windows of their cars. That's why I never buy the, second place is first loser thing that some people put out there. I will never, that team is not a losing team. That team accomplished a lot, man. Like the 93 Phillies, they're beloved and rightfully so. I mean, it was a magic ride, and part of sports is entertaining us and encapsulating that moment. And we'll never forget that team, even though they didn't win it. And guess what? They went up against a borderline dynasty with Kobe and Shaq. There's no crime in losing to that team.
And Iverson is the 6 foot, 165 pound, maybe guy who played fearlessly. So we love that about him. And the other guys were grunts. And, we're from Philly, so we're all kind of grunts. We all tagged along with our dad to go to work and saw what he had to do. And we all rode the L in the subway and, went to town and took the buses and just experienced what Philly is all about. So when that team did it in that style, it was just riveting, I think, for even people who weren't, big sports fans. They got on the train and enjoyed the ride.
All right, so let's fast forward. It gets interesting around 2012, 2013, the Sam Hinkie era, and it's the process, and we don't need to litigate that whole thing. But for you and in your role as a broadcaster, as you mentioned, partnership with the team and all that kind of stuff, how challenging were those years for you when the team is, let's face it, they're trying to lose to get good, to get better and to get good, but you still have to broadcast games with guys who nobody's ever heard of and they're getting smoked every night. How hard was that?
Let's put it this way, Rob. I'm a major NBA head, and I showed up at training camp the first year of the process, the first year for Brett Brown, and I looked around the gym and I didn't know half the guys.
Yeah.
And a lot of those guys were going to make the team. Tony Roten, I mean, I had no idea who he was, and some other guys who ended up making the club. And I just remember there was, I think it was opening night in Boston that year. And I'm looking at the roster and I'm saying to myself, how am I going to go through 82 games and explain this and do it in a way that doesn't, mention the T word?
Yeah.
So I ended up calling Sam Hinkie. And I left a message. He called me right back. He gave me his overarching philosophy, and I understood it. And in the way that I had to present it, I tried to present that philosophy as it went. And you may not agree with losing as a means to an end, but by the same token, nothing was done that was immoral. Well, immoral maybe, but illegal? No. I mean, everything was really by the book. Maybe it lasted a little longer than people would have liked. After a season or two, all right, you have enough assets. Now let's start to try to win. But, somebody once said to me that Sam Hinkie is, and a lawyer said this to me. He said, Sam Hinkie is lawyering up, like attorneys do when they file motions, and they do all these things to kind of defend their client in the best way. That's what he was doing. He was taking all options that were available to him to build it, to acquire assets and build a team for the future. And if it required losing, well, so be it.
Well, that's the interesting part of it, Mark. And again, I don't want to dig too deep into this, but the Sixers they were sort of upfront about it, and I think that angered some in the league, maybe Adam Silver or whatever. And it seemed like it kind of maybe hastened the departure of Hinkie. Did you think that's what it was? It was just too long or too overt? Because most teams have done it. The Spurs have done it. A lot of teams have done it over the years. Do you think that's what it was ultimately that forced Hinkie out? And you're surprised he never got back in?
I'd love to interview him and find out.
Yeah.
But I think for him, I wasn't convinced that Sixer management felt as though, all right, Sam was great at decomposing and gathering assets. Now, what do we think about him building this up and making it into a winning team? And that may have ultimately been, and now this is me just theorizing. I don't know that for a fact. But that might have been the thing that unfortunately caused him and the Sixers to part ways. Did he deserve a chance? I think in the opinion of some people, he did. But that was kind of the time where he was, he's separated from the Sixers.
Right.
that they parted company. It was at that time that they said, all right, now it's time to start to win. We got to acquire free agents and do whatever is necessary. And I'm going to say that Sixers management did not feel that way, and that's why they went the direction they went in.
How do you view it now, Mark, in hindsight? I mean, look, it's maybe a book that's not quite written yet because Joel Embiid's still here, et cetera, but they haven't been able to get past the second round. And you called a lot of those games, certainly during the process years. How do you look back? Like for me personally, I had no problem with the theory of it, of doing it, et cetera. I think there were mistakes made along the way, which ultimately have probably kept them from doing it. But I didn't have a problem with it philosophically. How do you look back at it?
Well, when you think about it, the way the system is set up, if you are a mediocre team or somewhere, let's say in the bottom third, but not the worst team, you're gonna pick, 8, 10, 12. Now, some great players have been mined not only later in the first round, but the second round. Guys appeared out of nowhere. Wasn't Tom Brady a 6th-round pick? I mean, all of that.
Jokic is a second rounder.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Enough said. So I think the question remains, shouldn't you be able to win and rehab your team at the same time? And I think that would be the theory behind the way the NBA does what it does. But it also allows you to, and it forces you, maybe because of the salary cap and whatnot, which I agree with, they should have it in place, to do what Sam Hinkie did. So I personally, if I was the general manager, and believe me, I'm not qualified to be the GM, but if I was the GM, I would try to figure out a way to do both.
Okay.
To win and to rehab your team. But I think the feeling was that if we we can get salary cap space, if we can inherit bad contracts and let those guys go, if we can gather numerous first-round picks, it increases the margin for error, and it gives us that much more capital to go out and get good young players who we can hopefully mold into a winning team.
I want to step to 2020, and we all go through it, the pandemic, and it's the challenges were, beyond belief. I mean, it's something I don't think any of us anticipated and we saw coming. It impacted sports in a big way, and there were shutdowns and abbreviated seasons and lack of travel and all those kind of things. A year later, you decided, it was time for you to put that part of your journey aside, the broadcasting part of it. Did the pandemic play any part in it where you weren't traveling like you were accustomed to, and you kind of said, this isn't the worst thing in the world, I'm not jumping on a plane every 2 seconds? Did it play any role in your stepping away from your broadcasting career with the Sixers?
Zero.
Okay.
I was on a time frame. I had a 3-year deal that turned out to be the last deal that I signed. My wife and I looked at each other, I guess, 1920. So it would have been in 18. It was actually before the pandemic.
Okay.
And we said to ourselves, let's play this out and see what happens. And after the first year, which was the 19, so it had been 2019, right before the pandemic, we decided that these last 2 years would be my last 2. So, in some ways, the other side of the pandemic was, as you put it, Rob, no traveling, that sort of thing. You kind of said to yourself, my goodness, I hope I don't get laid off because there are no games. And I thank NBC Sports Philadelphia for keeping me on. And, we got very creative. We suddenly became very acquainted with our phones, putting them up there. And, we did a story on the 1983 team. We interviewed guys, and we ended up doing a lot of stuff from home with flip phones and iPhones and internet. And, I learned a lot technically that I wouldn't have learned, I guess. But no, it did not. I was streaming towards the finish line, pandemic or not.
Was it difficult in 21, knowing in the back of your mind, you've known, for 3 years now that this was the plan, but when you finally got towards the end, towards the finish line, and obviously you didn't know how exactly it would end with, it depends on the team, but was that a challenge for you, kind of knowing that, wow, this is it for me? Was that hard, or was it sort of a joyous moment knowing I've had a great run here?
I think the one regret was I wanted to say goodbye to my colleagues as I had seen them around the league. As it turns out, we didn't travel that much anyway.
Right.
But for me to say goodbye to my colleagues, I couldn't do that either because word would have gotten out, and it was something that we wanted to, keep private until the end. Just a handful of folks who had to know knew, and so it was a little bit strange knowing that I was retiring and no one else knew except for a handful of people. And I would just say to myself, hey, I'm doing this for the last time. I'm doing this for the last time. And we didn't travel that last year. We did everything remotely. But, as the clock was winding down, I became a little bit wistful. It was, and it was, it was strange. And even now, as like you mentioned, I watched, everything but the chip on NBA TV and just, looking back at certain things. But like everything, Rob, there's a cost. And so the ego satisfaction, the rush of being live on the air, the cool part about being the TV voice of a team, you give that up for other things, time to be with your family, to focus on other things, to, enjoy other aspects of life. And it's amazing what you discover as a retiree. And quite frankly, while I love the Sixers and I love the NBA, I don't watch nearly as much as I once did. Simply because, when we sit on the sofa here and my wife and I look at each other, I could put the Sixers game on, or we can watch Grey's Anatomy. What do you want to do, honey? And my wife, who was never a huge sports fan,
Grey's is going to win out.
Yeah, yes. Grey's going to win out, right?
All right, could you stick for one more second? I just want to talk about the quote unquote fourth quarter. That I know you referred to it that way, which you're in terms of doing other things, which I think it's fascinating what you're doing now. So we'll get a quickie in here, Mark. We'll come right back. He's Marc Zumoff. I am Rob Ellis. You're watching the Rob Ellis Show on the A2D Radio Network. We're right back with Mark.
Hey, Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Philly Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site phillysportstrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
We're back. Rob Ellis Show, the great Marc Zumoff joining us here on A2D Radio Network. All right, let me hit you with this one, Zoo. And we get a lot of great reaction, by the way, from the people in the chat section. They love you, man. You are beloved in the city. That's got to be a great feeling. I mean, honestly, that has got to be the best feeling when you see that. Let me hit you with this. We do our agree to disagree poll, and I see where you fall on this, agree or disagree. Do you think the Sixers will win a championship with Joel Embiid?
I agree. I think they will.
Okay.
I think that time has to contribute to that. I'm thinking, what is he thinking, seeing Nikola Jokic, who arguably, and I don't want to say Russell and Chamberlain, but he's the other guy. He's the guy that he's compared to in the other conference. They've both been MVPs. What is it about him, aside from the fact that, he's got a terrific supporting cast, but what is it about him that has enabled him to lead his team to a title? Is Joel looking at that, taking that apart and thinking about that? And then, of course, it's always about who is around you to complement you, how good those players are. Are you making them better? And are they making you better? Are they allowing you to do your thing so that you could be the best player that you could be on the floor? I think Nick Nurse is a great hire. I've always admired him from afar. I think he's a very good defensive coach, which is the way that I look at the game first and foremost. And he's the kind of coach who, people talk all the time about adjustments. Nick Nurse, as I would watch him coaching the other team, and we only saw him, 4 times a year, was the guy who would preempt it, anticipating that there would be an adjustment. He's already adjusting in that regard. I think he's got that kind of mindset. So, Joel is a world-class, once-in-a-lifetime talent. He's a unicorn in his own way. And I can only hope, because the window is, given his injury history and everything else, it is not going to be open for too much longer. So, but I'm optimistic. That's just who I am.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk. So you step away, and you put it like, I think you put it in a great way. You talk about the fourth quarter. I want to enjoy my years, what I have left. And I also want to do some other things. Yes, you travel and you get to spend quality time with your wife and your kids, which, frankly, in the midst of your career, it was a challenge, right? So you do that kind of thing, but you also decide, you know what, I want to give back a little bit. And you go back to your alma mater, Temple University, become an associate director, Claire Smith Center for Sports Media at Temple University. So talk to me about that role and what made you want to do that, Marc?
I love Temple, first and foremost. I owe a lot of people a great debt on North Broad Street from my time there as a student. I've gotten to know David Boardman, the dean, Paul Gluck, who was in the business for so many years and now is a professor, and everybody, of course, knows Paul. And knowing that I was going to retire, as I discussed, I had many conversations with Paul, and eventually this opportunity came to pass. Claire Smith is an amazing woman, a woman of color, honored by the Baseball Hall of Fame, the first woman of color to be honored and has an amazing story to tell. And it's in her image that we have this center. And basically what we're looking to do, Rob, is set up programming and curricula that will help to level the playing field in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So people of color, women, what can we do to help them acquire the skills and the education necessary so that when they get out into the world, they have a more level playing field and they're able to overcome any of the prejudices that are out there. And I teach a play-by-play class, which is really cool because it's my craft and something I'm very passionate about. And the beauty of it is you can come into that class without any experience whatsoever, take the class and get an A, because I don't judge you on performance. The thing that I judge you on is, do you do the work? How much, and I glean how much you know from the readings and whatever by how much you participate in class. So show that you're into it, go out there and give it the old college try, complete the assignments, and you've aced it.
If you could give one piece of advice to aspiring play-by-play folks or somebody just looking to break into the business, what would it be?
This goes for anyone looking to break into our business, or I think really anything in life. And there are a lot of valuable things, certainly honing your craft, developing the skills, networking, and all of that, being nice to people. All those things are extremely important, but all that stuff to me is 1A underneath belief in yourself. Because if you don't have an inherent belief in yourself that you can actually achieve this dream, no matter what it is, Hollywood acting or sportscasting or, something that for a lot of people seems way out there, if you don't think that you can actually do it, it's going to be really difficult. Why? Because there'll be plenty of naysayers. Oh, you want to be the voice of the Sixers? No way. That's like a 1 in a million. And, I try to be real with people and say, yes, you have to believe in yourself, but it is a tall task, and you have to be ready to not achieve your dream as well, and fall back onto something else. But you'll be able to love yourself in the end, even if you don't achieve that dream, because you know that during a certain period of time, you gave it all you had. And then you had to U-turn because you wanted to get married, have a family. You were 35 years old and seeing that this is not going to happen. And you had to, sort of veer off the highway and do something else. So, but belief in yourself to me is paramount.
Last thing I wanted to hit you with, look, it wasn't easy. It's not easy for anybody following someone who had a long and illustrious career. Kate Scott stepped in to your role there at NBC Sports Philadelphia, and I think is doing one hell of a job, Marc. How have you? Did she reach out to you? I know sometimes she'll borrow some of your phrases in a very complimentary and loving, flattering kind of way. Talk to me about that dynamic with Kate and how you view it now as you're kind of sitting back, watching it and listening.
Frankly, Rob, I always felt as though I had to welcome her,
Hmm.
that I had to reach out to her because she was new to this.
Hmm.
And the task was really overwhelming. And forget about replacing me. You're coming into a hard scrabble market where what? We're going to have a woman do our games.
Right.
And, there's a lot of that out there.
Yep.
And Kate has detailed that on my podcast and
Hmm.
in any one of a number of articles, some of the stuff that she had to do. My wife and I always laugh the example for women sometimes going into a man's world. It's like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Kids, if you don't know who they are, Google them. But Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers were this great couple in the movies, and they would dance, and they were unbelievable. And my wife would always joke and say that Ginger Rogers could do anything Fred Astaire could do as a dance partner, only she had to do it backwards and in high heels. So for a lot of women, that's what for Kate Scott, that's what it was.
Hmm.
Forget replacing me. She had to come into Philly. She had to be the voice of a team and do it going backwards and in high heels because there were inherent prejudices against a woman doing games. But
Right.
God bless her, she's knocked it out of the park, and she's got a skin as thick as cantaloupe.
Yeah.
Because she's been able to ward off the critics and all the specious nonsense. And she's great. She's great at her craft. I listen to her all the time, and I sit there and I think, girlfriend, you got it going on. So
Yep.
long may she wave, and anything she needs, she knows she can reach back.
That's awesome. And actually on your Twitter, I guess your profile pic or whatever it's called, there's you hitting the bell, but there's also the backdrop of you and Kate. It looks like with City Hall in the background. It's very, very cool. I love that. It says a lot about you and your relationship with her. So tell everybody about the podcast, Fresh 24 Zumoff. Tell me, I know DJ Jazzy Jeff was your last guest, right, Mark?
He was, and we're going to continue in that vein. Coming up this week, we have a gentleman by the name of Mike Jackson. And Mike, while not a household name, is, let's put it this way, among the many, many accolades he has as a TV and movie and music producer. He is a business partner with John Legend. They're very good friends, and they're partners in a production company. And Mike is a huge Sixers fan, and he's from the area. So anyway, Fresh 24 is this: you have to have played, coached, been in the front office, or be someone of notoriety who roots for the Sixers. There's got to be like a Sixers connection there. And I don't want to give it away because we haven't done the interviews yet, but we have some really cool people who are coming up. And I appreciate the plug, and thank you so much. Fresh 24 with Marc Zumoff.
I got to tell you, it's been a pleasure, Mark, to talk to you. And I will tell you this, you've always been a great friend behind the scenes, whether just reaching out to you for advice or trying to steer you in the right direction. And I do appreciate it over the years, but thanks for taking a couple minutes today.
You got it, my friend.
All right. That is Marc Zumoff. Mark, take care, man. Talk to you soon. That is the great Marc Zumoff, everybody. A lot of fun, man. What a guy. What a pro. What a kind human being. That's for sure. All right. So let's also what we do on the Rob Ellis Show is we kind of run through everything else that's happening in the world of sports. And I appreciate it, my man Marcus with Pro Fan Talk. And by the way, all you guys in the chat section, all you guys and gals, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for making this a great opportunity and a lot of fun each and every week. And I love it. And we got next week, we have the great Yuki Washington. So we're not playing around, man. We go from Marc Zumoff to Yuki Washington next week. It's going to be fun. And people may not know Yuki's sports background, but we'll get into that. But let's kind of run through things right now. So we have a Sixers team that's sort of in limbo right now. It's a tough spot. We asked Mark the agree to disagree question about Joel Embiid winning a championship here. And Mark is very optimistic. I don't quite share the optimism that Mark does regarding Embiid, and it's not all Joel Embiid's fault. I think to an extent the organization has kind of painted itself into a corner and made things very difficult. They're at the mercy of James Harden and where that's headed. And I've told you guys all along, I thought he was going to be back with the Sixers. I never bought in fully to the Houston thing, to the Phoenix thing. Now, obviously, Phoenix is out the window with the Bradley Beal trade, but it feels more and more like Harden's back. And I just wonder to myself, ultimately, how does this look different if it's Joel and James Harden as the principals. I mean, maybe Tobias Harris gets moved, but I don't see a pathway, and I wish I did for this team to win a championship. But we'll see what kind of magic Daryl Morey can pull off. The Phillies are playing great baseball right now, and they're about to embark on a huge series with the Atlanta Braves. But to me, if you look at this Phillies team, almost every box is checked off in terms of what we thought they were going to be before, or hoped that they would be before the season. They're now hitting. You got Schwarber on fire in June. Trey Turner starting. It hasn't been like a rocket shot. It's been sort of slow and steady, starting to turn the corner a little bit. Harper's back. Power isn't there, but he's still hitting. And you're getting contributions from a lot of different people. Christian Pache is giving them some nice contributions. Cody Clemens has done a nice job. So you're seeing it from an offensive perspective. From a starter perspective, Wheeler, Suarez, Taijuan Walker, all pitching extremely well. They do need Nola to be better. He hasn't been awful, but we all know there's been the sort of implosion innings. He needs to be better than he's been. I think the experience drawn from last year starting slowly has helped them getting through the slow start this year. And now it's about chipping away a little bit. Now, I don't know ultimately if they win the division. To me, that doesn't matter. We saw it last year. They didn't win the division and got to the World Series, but you want to establish to yourself, at least in the regular season. They knocked off Atlanta in the playoffs last year, but in the regular season that you can beat them, it would be huge to take 2 out of 3. And then you get the Mets next. Mets aren't playing great baseball, but the Mets took it to you the last time you played them. So you want to be able to spank them a little bit here. But I like a lot of what's happening in the Phillies bullpen as well. I should absolutely mention them because I think they've been the most consistent part of the team the entire season. And there's a lot of options on the back end, be it Alvarado, Kimbrel, Soto, whatever, for Rob Thompson. So I think that part of it is huge. Beyond that, we're in that rare lull period for the NFL. The NFL is great at marketing itself and having something almost 12 months per year. But there is the little window between the OTAs and the draft, and training camp, where you just sort of sit there and you're like, all right, well, what are they going to be? And you start doing the paralysis, by an over-analysis paralysis move where you're just like, all right, they need this, they need that. I think they're going to be a really good team. The one thing I would say is defensively, it's going to take a minute for them to get going. There's a lot of new faces, 5 new starters, and you're depending on young, unproven kids. So I would just say have some patience on the defensive side and have high expectations on the offensive side right out of the chute. That's the way I view it, for the Eagles. Now, as far as the Flyers go, we have the draft coming up next week. I would expect them to be active because they've already been active this offseason. I think you're going to see more big names going, more established names going as they start to kind of rebuild this thing. Look, there's a lot of different ways that they could go too. And I think the beauty is they've been upfront with everybody saying it's going to take a little while. So, they're not quite there yet. They know that. The big piece that could go or could not go, some of it depends on some of the stuff that's been going on off the ice, is Carter Hart. Now, we don't know whether he's going to go or not, but that's going to be a big piece. We've already seen Provorov traded. I think, like I said, there's going to be more established players going. Certainly, you would think Kevin Hayes and people of that ilk aren't going to be here any longer, but I'm curious. I'm really curious what direction Keith Jones and Danny Briere take this thing, because we know they've been wholly irrelevant over the last 5-6 years. And I think with some of the moves they've made in the front office, I think there's the interest is a bit reinvigorated. Now, they're still 4th among the big 4 here in the 4 for 4, but I think they've at least gotten back in the public consciousness. But it's drafts, it's personnel moves. They get you back quicker than maybe people anticipate. And this is when you have to start doing it. You got to get creative. You got to be smart about things, and you got to do the right thing. So we'll see what ends up happening there for sure. All right. This has been fun, man. Marc Zumoff was a blast. Tell a friend. Rob Ellis Show, A2D Radio Network. Want to thank Tom. Want to thank Ralph, doing a great job producing the program, and every one of you guys in the chat section, every one of you guys hanging out and streaming and watching and listening. I do appreciate it. Again, we'll have Yuki Washington next week, so looking forward to that. Everybody, have a great rest of your week, and I will talk to you soon. I am Rob Ellis. Thanks for hanging. Appreciate it.